going to start. Okay, welcome. We're very pleased to see you here. Everybody's done the survey, and we will arrange for the digital measures, right? The digital measures credit. This is a workshop. This is one of 3 workshops that we're doing as part of the Advanced Career Management. It's part of the NSF Adaptation Grant, in which we're adapting programs that have been developed at other universities. This one was based on the University of Michigan's STRIDE program, but it's the University of Michigan's advanced program, and they call it LIFT, and it's for mid-career faculty. And we divided our workshops into 3 workshops. The first one was on the balance between research, teaching, and service. This one is what we were calling research intensive. So for people whose career trajectories are more focused on developing in the research area. And then the last one will be next week on leadership. I'm Patty Soderin, and Sonia Goltz is going to present part of this. We've developed this together. Brad Wells is on our advanced team, and he is the person in our advanced office, so you will find him in the library. And we'll introduce our panel members in just a moment. I actually don't know where is the oh, we go. Okay, I'm sorry. Where's the arrow key? Oh, it didn't work. Okay. I'm so sorry. Just one moment. Technical difficulties. Let me tell you what we're going to be doing today. We'll do a little bit of an introduction and tell you a little bit about just a little overview on what the research studies tell us about mid-career faculty and research-intensive trajectories. Then we have a distinguished panel of people who have been successful in this research-intensive trajectory, and we asked them to come and share some of their experiences, some of their insights with you. We'll do a breakout session where we have a little bit of homework activity and homework for you. We thought we'd have you talk with each other, and then we'll do a wrap up. So I thought I'd start with the idea of intersectionality, because we did ask a question on the pre-session survey that addresses this idea of intersectionality, and perhaps you're not familiar with it. So it is an important part of what we're doing with this grant research. The idea of intersectionality goes beyond the idea of diversity. So we're all about diversity and inclusion, but all of us are here at the university, and all of us have differences that are important or that matter in one way or another. And so this idea of intersectionality is an effort to say that your lives are complex, and those complexities can matter in the ways in which you develop your career and your professional identity. And so what we're trying to do with this concept is move beyond just the social categories that you check off on the survey lists, and beyond just a list of stereotypes. I like this definition, the complex and cumulative way that the effects of different forms of discrimination combine, overlap, and intersect. And so there are many different ways in which all of us at one point or another can feel discriminations, marginalizations, biases, stereotypes. Those things matter to us differently depending on the kinds of situations, and also depending on the ways in which various sorts of categories of our own identities can come into play. And sometimes you're not even expecting it, and it matters. And so there are overlaps and combinations, and those complexities are things that we'd like to be able to tap into. We'd like to be able to address those, not just the fact that you are in one category, and that's what we're addressing, but the ways in which these overlaps can happen, and the ways in which they can advantage or disadvantage you. And so in some of our grants in particular, we're interested in things that matter at TAC. For example, if you're a parent, You know, we don't often talk about faculty as parents, but that can be an important difference for you that makes a difference. Various abilities, you know, and various statuses, for example, international status. So those are perhaps categories I haven't thought about too much. They don't fall into the commonplace stereotype social categories that we often talk about, but we're interested in the ways in which those kinds of categories might interact or overlap with other categories that you're part of in ways that matter in your professional development. So I just wanted to touch base on this idea of intersectionality, because it was, it's part of our survey, it's part of our grant, it's part of the ways in which we're trying to address faculty success. Oh yeah, this is my like really dense and too much text slide about research findings on the kinds of issues that mid-career faculty might run into when you're developing this research-intensive trajectory. One of the things about mid-career faculty, we're talking about after tenure, but before you go up for full, is that, you know, mid-career faculty can often feel as though you're sort of in a, they call it a mid-career malaise, sort of in a holding pattern, or, you know what you've done for tenure, you kind of know, you know, you'd like to go forward, but moving in those directions can be difficult, and keeping up the vitality and energy in your research programs, in your career process can be difficult. I find in the research a lot of ways in which different universities are doing different things, but the idea of offering bridge funding, for example, big issue is funding, is the highly competitive nature of funding these days, is finding funding for new research directions, moving from one area that you've developed to something else you want to work on, and that kind of bridge funding is something that would be helpful, but not a lot of universities are thinking in that way. There are ways in which our collegial networks matter, depending on how you've developed those collegial networks. For example, who asks who to collaborate, you know, what kinds of connections you can make, makes a big difference in productivity. Sort of research practices like self-citing can make a big difference in terms of how some of your statistics show up. And we have some evidence that people in certain groups do a lot less self-citing. The feeling that we need other kinds of skills than those that might have helped you get tenure. Organization skills and executive skills, things that will move you forward into more leadership kinds of positions in your research areas. Picking up the tasks that have higher promotability, that have higher visibility, and recognizing what those are, particularly those kinds of tasks that give you more research visibility. And then trying to move beyond the idea that career advancement is based on sheer numbers, right? Your numbers of publications, or, you know, the numbers you get on your grants, and allocating your time so that you can take advantage of opportunities, not just for those numbers, but for work that matters. So different ways in which the research suggests to us that as mid-career faculty in a research-intensive career path, there are things that you need, there are kinds of issues and limitations that you might be facing, but there are ways that perhaps we can help you address some of those. And so we thought we would ask a couple of researchers who have been successful in their areas to share some of their experiences with you. And then we'll talk a little bit more about ways in which you can utilize resources and opportunities. So I'd like to invite our panelists to the front. We're very pleased to have Dr. Minerick and Dr. You here with us. We asked them a couple of questions to think about. We asked them to think about a couple of questions. In fact, we asked you to think about a number of questions and then to pick and choose and just tell us something about their experiences. the strategies that they used, particularly to develop the reputations that they have to develop as researchers, going into new areas. This is always, well, a lot of times it can be a bit of a risk. Juggling various research activities. You know, we all know writing grants takes a lot of time, so does writing publications, so does doing the other demands of your job. Do you have other questions?
I didn't put them in the slides.
Oh, okay. Well, let's start with those.
You had about 7 more questions that you sent them. So.
We asked them to think about these questions and think about their experience. So thank you so much for being here.
Okay, so for question 1, the question on strategies that I use to maintain the research focus and support. For me, I realized early on it's always been about the people. And with some of the research that Patty was describing about how women tend to spend their time, focusing on the people can sometimes be a detriment because you spend more time on outreach and those types of activities. But I realized in the research that the focus was setting up my PhD students for success. And so by prioritizing them as individuals that I was supporting their career, it helped me block and prioritize the time. So the way I structured it is I would organize the projects in such a way that when I wrote, for instance, an NSF grant, there were typically 3 objectives that were in it. Those 3 objectives were then for the students, and they aligned with the papers that the students were expected to publish for their PhD. And so that was kind of each objective, each paper, right? It would position students for 3. If there was a side project that came up, then yay, we got another paper out of this. And if they had an outstanding literature review in their dissertation, yay, we got a review paper, and that was additional citations, and it really helped it. So it was sort of formulaic in that sense, but the students knew from the start sort of what to expect. Even students that I started on projects that ultimately did not get funding from a funding agency, there would still been defined those 3 objectives, so kind of put it there. So I would organize the projects, and I'd put them in the driver's seat. And I used my calendar to help prioritize my time. So we've always had weekly group meetings, which are, in some cases, it got, when I had 9 PhDs at one time, it got up to 3.5 hours for those. Yeah. But we'd schedule a weekly group meeting, and then I also had one-on-one time with the students. And as I got busier and busier in administration, that one-on-one time, I focused to writing alongside them. So their job was to come with their current manuscript and where it was, and we would stand there and edit it together and get those manuscripts out. So that was how I did it. I've got other questions, but I figured maybe you want to.
Well, you know, I think you mentioned one thing really. I think that's very, very important. It says, you know, how you organize your time. You know, I think that's like it's very, very important. You know, I think one time I was thinking, you know, every day really you really have a lot of things to do. So I think really we have to do some kind of you know, which one really is the highest priority. Really, this one has to go. And some work really can be delayed. It's delayed, you know, until really somebody really yelled. So some work really like that kind of priority to me. But of course, you know, for some of things, for example, it really a proposal is due. Okay, that is something right. We really want to do it. Of course, that's basically the highest priority. Of course, some classes I have to teach. That's a high priority. I have to have that done. So some other things, basically, you know, move later. I definitely agree with Adrienne.
Do you want to go to the next question?
Well, the first one actually is also the one part is basically about international reputation. Maybe I can just you know, chip in a little tiny bit there, and then I'll give the opportunity to Adrienne again. So about that one, you know, I personally personally think, it's in a lot of conferences or some kind of those kind of events, I personally think it's always nice to volunteer things. For example, if there's a volunteer to say, okay, you need to write a research statement. If there's an opportunity like that, of course, do it. If there's a committee meeting, they're looking for volunteers to do something, maybe to host a symposium. I really don't mind to be the organizer for that. So I really do that one, started to do that one before even I came to Michigan Tech. So when I was assistant professor, I just, of course, at that time, really, I don't know much. I don't really fear much. I just, okay, do it. Even sometimes really it's a little bit beyond my ability, but I still try it. So, over the years, I think I accumulated a lot of experiences on those things. So basically, so now if I really say, okay, I'm going to really do some, organize an international conference or something like that, I really don't have much fear there. I think like, just experience a little more. I think it's a little bit easier to manage these situations. I think over the years, of course, I think it's paid off a lot. So, of course, volunteer also, there are also other volunteers opportunities. For example, review proposals. Sometimes, agencies like that. Of course, NSF definitely is a really nice place to help them review proposals. But a lot of other like state level or university level projects, I think those are also, if in the past, I really normally I say yes, normally review those things. Right now, of course, it's just too much of requests. I think to say, a lot of times just decline those requests. So a lot of the international proposal reviews. So right now, I tend to decline to review those things. And of course, I like to review more, in NSF or a national research program in US. Those things are really something I like to review. And occasionally help review some, university proposals. Something, for example, like, we have some seed money and a lot of universities have similar programs. So I help them review those things. I think, sometimes just gain a little bit more experience on those things. And also the experience, for those kind of, international reputation or national reputation, a lot of other things, other than, conferences and, proposal grant reviews, and also maybe something about, other as needed services. So normally, if you believe those things are going to make you more nationally or internationally known, I think it's a great idea to participate.
So, I'd echo that concept that whenever volunteering for something, if you can leverage it to some additional benefit going forward, that's even better. So, for instance, when asked to review proposals by NSF or NIH, if you're not planning to submit to that program in the future and it's far afield, that's a good reason to say no and spend your time differently. If, however, reviewing in that program is going to give you insights into what they are looking for and give you an advantage when you apply in the next cycle, then most definitely reviewing for that program is valuable. And the national societies, for a number of years, I was involved in the AS Electrophoresis Society and started out as a program chair and went all the way through to president. And that did afford a fair amount of name recognition and visibility that would not have originally had, that I would not have originally had as a consequence of that. And so sort of continuous service, I'd recommend. Coming in and chairing for a single session, there's value add in that, but if it can build up to a credential on your CV that shows some additional recognition, that's particularly valuable. Okay. So,
yeah, well, my feeling is, a lot of times, for a medical career to move forward, really, a lot, it looks like the annual promotion committee is always looking at, okay, are there any international impact or reputation or something like that? So I think that's of course at least as a minimum one thing I guess I would do. It's easier to do, I guess.
The other is, you'll have to forgive this sort of informal term, but there's this concept of conference buddies. These are people that you see once a year at a conference. You've got a rather collegial relationship with them. So you're, oh, it's great to see you, and you catch up with them. So it gives you a bit of a community. You get to watch their research progress. You get to have these talks on innovation and back and forth. Maybe you come together for a collaboration and then move apart. You adapt one of their techniques that they may have done, etc. So that community of conference buddies, I think, is also a key thing that can help in that mid-career stage, because we're small enough of an institution that we don't have in every single research area the critical mass for you to always have a collaborator for every new area or venture that you go through. And for me, conference buddies have been great, because when I venture over into this field, I can sit down and say, all right, we're struggling with this. I know you've tried it. What did you learn? And you get what's behind the scenes on the publications. Because the issue with publications is we usually report what works, but we don't report what doesn't work. And so when you go to try to reproduce something and then add to it, you've got to repeat all those failures, unless you have that informal conversation with them, to know to really not try what is an obvious solution, but just so I recommend that community. I think it's
Yeah, I agree. And then so you naturally move to the second question.
Yeah, I kind of did. Okay, so the second question, which is on new research areas and building collaborations over time. My initial thoughts on this is my nature is to collaborate. I will say that I've discovered in my career I've had to initiate almost all of the collaborations that I've had. It's infrequent that people come to me. And I went through this stage mid-career where I thought, all right, am I deficient in some way? Am I a pain to work with? What's my problem with this? And eventually got over it and decided that that's okay. I could be the one who initiated. But I did learn from each of those to draw from past experiences and work to be considerate of my collaborators. So in the process of wanting to instruct my students to be good citizens and good researchers, right? I have I have a kind of guidelines and code of conduct that I review with them regularly. And one of those is to keep collaborators informed. There's nothing worse if you're collaborating with somebody than getting notified, we're submitting this abstract, we're submitting this tomorrow, can you look over it? Right? If anybody's been in that situation, you know it's really rough because you're worried about quality control. If they're a little bit further afield of yours, then you're struggling because they're saying things that are inaccurate. Your name's on it. Oh no, what's going on? And so trying to teach students that, transparently say, hey, we have this conference coming up. We think this would be a good fit. Do you want to submit an abstract? I'll get you the abstract. Sending it in advance and all the rest of it. That being said, not saying our group is perfect on that. But I would say that of the collaborations that I've had, I sort of did a quick inventory. I'd say 60% of them have been local to Michigan Tech or my institution, which many of you know I moved institutions. 20% have been national collaborations, and about 20% have been international collaborations on projects. So it sort of worked that way out of the conference buddies, but that's how it came from.
Well, that's great. Really, I definitely I agree with even. One thing is I really enjoyed to really collaborate with new people. So especially new areas. For example, when I came here to Michigan Tech 14, 15 years back, I thought, okay, nanotechnology seems really cool, but I'm a civil engineer. Really, what all I do is using civil engineering materials to do things. All the roads, I build the roads basically. That's basically essentially I do. Okay, mixed with concrete or stones or asphalt, stuff like that. Really, nano materials, it's just so far away from my field. But I think it's going to make a lot of differences. I really like to do things searching around on campus. Okay, maybe physics people doing that, material science people maybe doing that. Just look around, really eventually really did some really interesting work on that area. So just some kind of some examples. I think really collaboration is really great experience. No matter is within this institution or maybe national or international collaboration, all those really pays off.
So we could launch into the third question here. Is there any questions? Okay, so on the juggling, I mentioned earlier that I have tended to organize things into 3. And that power of 3, I've applied multiple times over. I read an article one time in Nature that infants as young as 3 months old can do statistics and figure out the probability. And they're most effective if there are 3 options there, and they can pick the one that gets them what they want, either food or attention or whatever else. So I've concluded maybe my brain has not evolved past that of a 3-month-old, but I do things in 3s. And that is that I think in the area of manuscript publication, the proposal development, and I try to keep 3 balls up in the air for every single one of those, meaning that there's always a manuscript that's in the early stages, there's always one that is close to finished, and then there's one that has just been submitted, or I can hang my hat on for about a month or so. And then after that, it's this realization, wow, you need to get back up and get those manuscripts up out of the door and kind of lean on students again. With proposals, I've tended to do that as well, that if you have one in ideation, one that is about ready to be submitted, and one under review, that I can tend to keep track of those. So I use the power of 3s in many of those. I will be honest, when it comes to juggling, especially when it comes to proposals, that's been the hardest one because it tends to happen late at night and on weekends, and you're giving up time from family to be able to juggle those. So those have been the hardest ones to do. Manuscripts, by writing with my students and the students being central to learning that process, I've been able to schedule that in time and sit next to them to write it and so on. And I'll also add that the power of 3s also goes to my students' dissertations. So if you look pretty closely at them, you'll discover that there's an intro chapter, there's a lit chapter, there's paper 1, there's paper 2, there's paper 3, there's any unfinished work that's there, and there's conclusion. And so the dissertations follow a bit of a formula that's associated with that. So power of 3s.
Well, that's really good. I learned something too. Well, I think one thing, Adrienne mentioned that, for the articles, manuscript, submitted, something is ready to submit, something under preparation, or roughly those kind of 3 categories. I heard that really, when I'm doing my PhD work, I heard that. I think it's a really useful idea. I think that's really good because a lot of times really, we probably ideally, every year we have papers. So basically, when I was doing my PhD, I remember that my advisor one time said, "Gosh, this year I don't have papers," and it was kind of like a little bit frustrating because, one thing I remember he said that he did not have a mentor one time. Basically, because I take it back. Maybe there's different ideas on mentors. I think maybe the mentors provided different advices. Maybe one mentor said, "You only publish the best things." Right? The other mentor said, "No matter what, you have to publish." No, what are you going to do? So, but no matter what, I think Adrienne really mentioned a really good strategy. You have to have the different stages of articles there just to get ready.
Can I open it up to questions at this point? Okay, what questions do you guys have? Okay,
I got a question for the panel. about quality and quantity. As you may know, this day that publication has been like a lot of this day that actually do subsidization to their peers and all that. And from what I heard, let's say University of Washington, some people say that if you get Nobel Prize on something, you got full professor promoted just right away. Where do you stand on quality versus quantity? Because obviously, if you do nothing, there's a problem. But if you do too much, that could be judged as a negative feedback to us that say you're really not really particularly engaged in all sort of work that you've done in quantity.
That's a really good question. And I view it as somewhat of a continuum. You can have individuals that are so focused on quality that they can never hit the submit button on anything. And that is a stagnating, frustrating mental place to be. And you can have individuals where they're pushing out things that really have not put enough time and development into it. And so the impact of them is very low. The reputation that they build is very low. So I think there's actually a balance that you want to, my own personal feeling is to push to higher quality and slightly lower quantity, but to balance between those things. I will admit that my own personal stomach, if I've submitted a paper and it is not been accepted at that highest tiered journal, then I am willing to submit it one more time. I've actually never encountered the situation where I've had to submit it a third, but I have not been willing to ever submit a third time. You know, it's in, and I've done that with proposals where submitting it that third time has kind of been hard, and I've sometimes abandoned ideas for that. And I've been in this situation, for instance, with a student that really needed the student's data is very valuable, and so submitting a proposal that third time, psychologically, I struggled with number 3 for some reason. I'm not saying that's the rule of thumb where you know that your quality has gone down, but I do think that balance of closer to quality, but not so high quality that you can never hit the submit button, you can never get it out the door, is a dangerous place to be.
And that's two extremes. I think we get a good balance somewhere in between.
I agree with you.
Okay, and then I'm going to just repeat that question. So that question was about quality versus quantity, just so the recording can pick it up. Okay, another question? Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but let me start with one about, you talked about kind of going into other areas. And one thing, I tend to get excited about new ideas and new projects, and I worry a little bit about not having, going into too many things where I don't have a niche that's kind of that I'm known for or something. I wonder how you balance that in terms of establishing reputation in an area that you're going into too many.
Well, maybe I'll give a try. I think I have some kind of experience basically working with different completely, I would say not really complete new field. Like I just mentioned something, I mentioned the nanomaterials. First, of course, I really at that time I'm thinking, okay, nanomaterial must be something really cool stuff. It's going to change a lot of things, and then of course, when you build the roads, you need a lot of materials. It's not a few, the physics professor told me, how much do you have? You have nanograms or something. Okay, we need kilograms. Okay, so basically the size is different. So, but then of course they provide really the basic, ideas about how this kind of material work. For myself, so basically the application. So it basically a lot of things basically I can contribute a lot. So that's basically I still think I did not really miss my direction. Because my idea is the folks, let's say, my idea is to find the best materials to build a road. That's basically, and then of course, no matter how complicated the new material is, essentially those things need to work with the existing materials or method to build a better roles. So that's basically you are not really completely lost, in that journey. So basically, it just add a new dimension to you. I think that's what I think.
So you'll laugh at this, but I apply the power of threes to that, meaning that there's in any given area, I've allowed myself to branch into kind of 3 main avenues and try out new ideas in those. And I really try to split it evenly between those that are the foundational basic physics of it and those that are the really fun out there ideas. And by being able to balance those, we've been able to tie it back to the fundamental science in a lot of cases. And then it's also remained exciting because some of these challenges and problems in our areas can be quite entrenched. And to focus entirely on those, I don't know, it tears down the spirit at times, whereas the fun ones are energizing. And then, of course, our students, thinking to their education, they need those foundations because as they go on to do independent research or their jobs in industry, you want to make sure that they've got that framework and it's really solid. So, I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Good questions, and I forgot to repeat that one, but it was about how do you know if you're going into too many areas? And we got some good answers. Okay, yes, maybe one or two more quick ones.
So I'm wondering about, if you could speak just a little bit more about something that was one of the panel questions actually, which is, you've talked a lot about balancing your research activities between publications and grant writing and working with graduate students, which I feel like is the easy part of balancing. The hard part of balancing is how do you do all of that while also teaching and doing service? So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about strategies for that, particularly as you move into this sort of mid-career phase and how that's different from pre-tenure.
So I don't know if I should publicly admit this. What I discovered was that with teaching, that I would spend the vast majority of my time doing that and not enough time on research. And so I decided that in order to get my credentials where they needed to be, and this about halfway through as an assistant professor, I needed to flip that. And so what I would do is I would block a couple of hours before class to do class prep, and I would put myself basically in rush panic mode for class. And since I was in rush panic mode, I could say no to other stuff and focus very intently on it. I will tell you, my teaching evaluations did not suffer when I did this. When I squeezed my prep time for class, it didn't suffer. It's harder for first time teaching. I got it down to where I would do 2 hours of prep for 1 hour in the classroom, and if it was a new, it had to be 3.5 hours. That was the minimum I could get it down.
Did that include grading?
No, grading, my trick on grading has been to hide out at the tea room and just, to not let it linger. To just, if there was an exam the next afternoon, I would hide out in the tea room, drink a little bit too much tea, and just make sure I got it all done. I also paid out of my own IRAN, my own TAs, so I didn't wait for the university or the department to allocate those. If I needed somebody, I paid for it because my time was real valuable. Does that help?
That does.
I will be forthright and tell you that my ability to submit proposals has plummeted moving into administration. I've not been able to figure out that struggle. So it's a do as I say, not as I'm able to do at this point in time.
And then I think we had one last question, and then maybe you can answer the last question. How's that? Okay, you had a question, right?
Yes. So my question is, how would you recommend, or what would be the best balance to participate in the medium size or large size proposal activities as a mid-career faculty member? So for example, since I became associate professor, I kind of intentionally started to contribute into the multi-million-dollar or larger proposals, and by working with a full professor, so it's through collaboration, and then particularly seeking more like a new research areas. But extending my expertise a little bit, and then contributing to the larger proposal. But it's always has some risk, and I've been a little bit frustrated because the large multi-million-dollar proposals, it is extremely challenging to even submit that proposal. And then sometimes we decided not to propose, so that not decided not to submit the proposal. So we kind of wasted a couple months effort, or sometimes so long because of eventually a PI's decision or something like that. But would you have some recommendations to the career faculty members? How much we should contribute, and then also how much effort we should also maintain our own research areas.
I guess Adrienne really has a lot more experience on bigger proposals. My biggest like 800,000 only. It's not really big as as your skill. But I think since you as a mid-career faculty, you are not PI. I think the majority of the risk is not on you. You are contributing a slice of your expertise. I think my feeling is maybe the risk to you is not that huge. Probably it will not really kill your career or anything. You still do your things. You can contribute to other teams. I think. Of course, maybe Adrienne has some more secret how to manage those kind of bigger scale projects.
I would agree in splitting, maybe half and half, sign on for half of those. If you go to lead a large proposal, go to Pete, go to Jess, make sure that they're in your court and willing to help support, and strategize on how to delegate so that your time is spent on the actual strategy and the idea and not spent herding the cats to get the supplemental documentation together. Yeah, so I would agree.
Great questions. Nice panel discussion. I think we're going to move on, but we'd like to thank our panelists first. Thank you both. So we have just a few minutes left. I think we'll just take about 5 minutes to just find somebody nearby, talk to them about some of your own strategies, maybe reflect with them on what you heard so far. Just about 5 minutes, and then we have to move on. So find somebody near you. Maybe talk to panelists as well, if you want to do that.
Sometimes.
Sorry, I'm going to cut you off here. But let's maybe have a couple people share some of the topics that you talked about in your smaller groups here. Quickly.
Anything that came up for you that you think would be useful to share with others would be fine too.
New strategies or issues or what?
One of the things I heard was the different cultures between fields, and the extent of collaboration really depends on what field you're in and how that's valued and perceived.
Okay.
One of the things we were talking about was volume. Like, Adrienne's rule of 3 is real nice, but I feel like I'm like 3 times 3 right now. And so, how do you balance that, when things are really scaling up? So.
Yeah, and context. So when I was in graduate school, I heard that one of the top researchers in the field said you always have to have 15 projects going. There's just no way, right? For most of us, that's because you don't have, many graduate students that want to work with you. So, yeah. Okay. So hopefully that was useful. I know our time's short and we didn't get a lot of discussion, but hopefully you gathered some stuff here. Remember, our ultimate goal is to build these affinity groups where you can start to get more resources on your own, and we would support that. We're going to coordinate and support that. And we are giving homework each time, and you will, in your affinity groups, keep each other accountable. Our plan eventually is to put these materials on a Canvas course, and then you can have them and reflect on them and make sure you're doing the homework. So in the past, the last one that I know several of you weren't at that session, but we asked people for homework to identify your strengths and weaknesses and compare them to your career desires. So this is almost like a gap analysis an organization might do, but you're doing it on yourself. Okay, and then so now the other part is the opportunities, threats portion of the gap analysis, or the SWOT analysis, sorry about that. We're kind of combining two things here, but the current homework is identify opportunities and resources. So you might have heard some today, or there might be others that you know about that you think you should take advantage of as you address your gaps. So you address your gaps in the first bullet, and then start figuring out what are some resources I should take advantage of. You heard Adrienne said, be sure if you're in a large project to take advantage of the research support here on campus. Identify possible obstacles that might occur in your research intensive career path, and think about how that will go into career planning. So we're going to do, as we go through this year, we're going to do more of the career planning, and we're just kind of getting you prepared at this point. So any questions on the homework? Okay, and just I think to review our events, we have another session next week, mainly focused on leadership. So if anybody's interested in possibly that career path as well, you can come to that. And then in November, December, as we said before, we'll be starting to structure these affinity groups. So out of these sessions that we've created, we're going to hopefully people can identify their. And you may not know, but you can just pick an type of affinity group, whether you're interested in balance, research intensive, or the leadership, and we'll put the groups together. We're going to do a peer mentoring training that's probably going to be on Canvas. We're going to do get some senior mentors, train them, and probably have a social in November or December, and then start this whole process, these affinity groups with the senior mentoring and the peer mentoring throughout next semester. So that's essentially our plan for the program. And thanks a lot for coming. If you didn't get a sheet to do the survey, Brad has those for you, and we also need to get your name for digital measures. So thanks so much.
If you are interested in taking the survey today, I can pull it up on an iPad for you in the back, and you can just stay here and take it. Otherwise, I'll send the link out sometime this evening or tomorrow morning. Yes. Yes. That's an area.
Okay. Yeah. That is one place